Reddit stories to fall asleep to in 30 minutes. The man who fed birds in the park. Every morning at exactly 7 a.m., Mr. De Vries walked to the park with a small bag of birdseed in his coat pocket. He made his way to his usual bench under a large oak tree and whistled a soft tune. Within minutes, birds began to gather. Sparrows, robins, pigeons, even a few bold magpies. He knew them all. "Good morning, Carol," he said to a cheeky starling that always arrived first. "Right on time, as always." The starling hopped around happily, pecking at the seeds. People who frequented the park began to notice him. At first, it was just a few early joggers who gave him a friendly nod. But over time, more and more people stopped to watch the birds land on his shoulder. Some even asked if they could feed the birds too. And Mr. De Vries happily shared his seeds. Gradually, a small community formed around the bench. A young mother brought her daughter every morning, watching with fascination. A student with a laptop started spending his mornings there, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. Even a grumpy businessman paused occasionally to take in the scene. One day, when Mr. De Vries didn't show up, people wondered where he was. The next morning he was back, wearing a slightly thicker coat and holding a warm cup of coffee. Someone had brought him a thermos. From then on, the park wasn't just a place for birds, but a place where strangers became friends, sharing quiet moments of kindness. The barista who remembered everyone's order. In a small coffee shop in town, there was a barista named Ava who had a special talent. She remembered everyone's order. Whether you came in daily or only once a month, the moment you stepped through the door, Eva would smile and say, "The usual." And most of the time, she was right. For Tom, a teacher always in a rush, his cappuccino was ready before he reached the counter. Lisa, a student, never had to ask for her chai latte with oat milk. And for Mr. Jansen, an elderly man who was hard of hearing, she always saved a seat by the window and brought him his black coffee without a word. One day, Sarah walked in, looking exhausted. She slumped into a chair without ordering. Eva glanced at her, smiled, and placed a warm cup of tea with honey in front of her. Sarah looked up and chuckled weakly. "How did you know I needed this?" Eva shrugged. "You seemed like you were having a tea kind of day." From that moment on, the regulars realized it wasn't just about coffee. It was about being seen, about that small moment of connection in a busy world. The neighbor who planted flowers for everyone. In a quiet street just outside the city, Mr. Willemser, a retired man with a love for gardening, lived in a house with the most beautiful front yard. Tulips bloomed in the spring, sunflowers stood tall in the summer, and dahlias added color in the fall. One day, he decided not just to tend to his own garden, but to brighten up the neighborhood. He started small, planting a few flowers by his neighbor's fence. A week later, he added a row of lavender bushes in front of another house. At first, no one noticed, but slowly the street began to change. Where there were once only grey sidewalks, flowers started to bloom. Neighbors began to ask, "Who's doing this?" When they found out it was Mr. Willems, they wanted to help. Within months, the entire neighborhood was involved. People planted flowers together, added benches, even built a small herb garden. What started as a quiet act of kindness turned into a community project. And now, when people walked down the street, they couldn't help but smile at the explosion of colors. The woman who shared tea in the park. Every afternoon, around 3 o'clock, Mrs. Van Dyke went to the city park with a small thermos and a few cups. She sat on a wooden bench overlooking the pond and poured herself a cup of tea. One day, a young woman hesitated before approaching her. "That smells lovely," she said softly. Mrs. Van Dyke smiled and held up an extra cup. "Would you like some?" The woman hesitated, then nodded. They sat together, sipping their tea, watching the ducks glide over the water in comfortable silence. From that day on, Mrs. Van Dyke always brought an extra cup. Sometimes a student joined her, sometimes an elderly man with a dog. Some stayed for just a few minutes. Others shared long stories. The tea became a small ritual, a moment of peace for whoever needed it. And though the visitors changed, one thing remained the same: the warm presence of Mrs. Van Dyke and the comforting tea that was always ready. The man who helped turtles cross the road. Along a winding road near a lake, there lived a man named Tobias. Every spring and summer, turtles would leave the water to lay their eggs, and often they had to cross a dangerous road. Tobias couldn't bear to watch them struggle. So, on sunny days, when he knew the turtles were active, he grabbed a chair and sat by the side of the road. Each time he saw a turtle, he got up, checked for cars, and gently carried the turtle to the other side. Sometimes, he even held up traffic for them. At first, people thought he was just an eccentric old man. But then, drivers started slowing down. Some even got out of their cars to help. One day, a woman pulled over and rolled down her window. "Why do you do this?" she asked. Tobias shrugged. "Because they don't understand the road, but we do." From then on, he became known as the Turtle Guardian. And every spring and summer, the turtles knew that someone was always there to help them safely across. The cafe that only served one type of cake. In a small town nestled between rolling hills, there was a tiny cafe called the Honey Spoon. It was cozy, with wooden tables, soft lighting, and a smell of cinnamon that lingered in the air. The cafe was known for one peculiar thing. It only served one type of cake. No matter what time of year you visited, there was always a freshly baked honey cake sitting on the counter, cut into perfect slices. Some people thought it was odd. Why not have variety? But those who tasted the cake never complained. It was rich, yet light, sweet, but not overpowering, with hints of vanilla and warm spices. Locals and tourists alike found themselves drawn to the Honey Spoon for reasons they couldn't quite explain. People who came in for a quick coffee often stayed for hours, listening to the faint jazz playing in the background, watching the rain patter against the windows, or chatting softly with strangers. The owner, an elderly woman named Clara, never revealed her secret recipe. "It's not just the cake," she would say, with a knowing smile. "It's the feeling that comes with it." And somehow, everyone understood exactly what she meant. The postman who wrote letters. Back in an age where most people communicated through screens, there was a postman named Jacob who did something unusual. He wrote letters back. Every day, Jacob delivered letters and packages across the town, greeting everyone with a kind smile. But he noticed something. Some letters never seemed to receive replies. One day, he saw an elderly woman sigh as she checked her empty mailbox. Another time, he watched a little girl excitedly send a letter, only to look disappointed a week later when nothing came back. So Jacob decided to change that. Whenever he saw a letter that seemed lonely, ones addressed to pen pals who never responded, old friends who had lost touch, or even letters sent to fictional characters, he started writing back. His responses were simple, always kind, never intrusive. To the little girl who wrote to a fairy princess, he sent back a beautifully decorated note, sealed with golden stickers. To the elderly woman who wrote to her late husband, he replied with a gentle message. I think he would be so proud of you today." Soon, word spread about the mysterious replies. People began writing letters, not just for the hope of receiving one back, but because it felt comforting, just to send something out into the world. And Jacob, he never admitted he was the one writing them. He just kept delivering letters, knowing that sometimes all people needed was a little sign that someone was listening. The library with a secret garden. At the edge of a small town, tucked between a bakery and an old bookstore, there was a quiet little library that held a secret. To most visitors, it seemed like any other library. Rows of books, a cozy reading area, and a friendly librarian who always seemed to know exactly what book you needed. But those who ventured to the very back of the library, past the biographies and old newspapers, would find a small wooden door with a tiny brass keyhole. Most people ignored it, assuming it was a storage closet. But if you were lucky enough to be invited by the librarian, she would hand you a small key with a wink. Beyond the door was something magical, a hidden garden, overflowing with wildflowers, wooden benches nestled between vines, and a small koi pond where golden fish glided lazily through the water. There was no sign, no announcement, no rule about who could enter. It was simply a quiet space for those who needed it, a place to read in the sunshine, to escape from the world for a little while, or to sit in silence and listen to the rustling leaves.
The quiet bench under the maple tree. In a peaceful park, there was a quiet bench under a large maple tree. The bench had been there for as long as anyone could remember, nestled at the edge of a winding path that led down to a small pond. It was the perfect spot for those who needed a moment of peace. At dawn, when the air was still cool and the world was just waking up, a man named Henry would sit on the bench, sipping his coffee and watching the sun slowly rise over the trees. He had been coming to this park every morning for years, finding comfort in the simple beauty of the day beginning. Other park goers came and went, an early jogger, a mother with a stroller, a group of school children on their way to class. But the bench was always there, waiting. One autumn morning, a woman named Lily sat down beside Henry. She was new to the town and had heard from others that this bench had a special kind of quiet. "Do you mind if I sit here?" she asked, a bit hesitantly. "Of course not," Henry replied with a kind smile. "I think it's meant for sharing." And from that day forward, the two would sit together on the bench, sometimes talking softly about life, sometimes simply enjoying the silence. Over time, more and more people came to the bench to take a break from their busy lives, always finding a moment of calm beneath the broad branches of the maple tree. The bench, like the park itself, was a place where time slowed down, a little corner of peace for anyone who needed it. The little garden by the school gate, just outside the gates of a small elementary school, there was a little garden that the children often passed by on their way to and from school. It wasn't a very large garden, just a few flower beds, a couple of benches, and a winding stone path. But it was always well tended, full of colorful flowers in the spring and vibrant green leaves throughout the summer. The garden was cared for by an elderly woman named Mrs. Jenkins. She was the grandmother of one of the children at the school, but she had been tending to the garden for many years, even before her granddaughter had been born. Every morning, she would arrive with her gardening tools, carefully pruning the plants, watering the flowers, and planting new ones as the seasons changed. The children loved walking past her garden. They often stopped to smell the flowers, marvel at the butterflies that fluttered nearby, or sit on the benches and chat with Mrs. Jenkins. She always had a kind word for everyone and would share small bits of wisdom about growing things, whether it was plants or people. Just like these flowers, you need time to grow, she'd say with a gentle smile. Be patient with yourselves. The parents, too, appreciated her efforts. It was a quiet reminder to them that there was beauty in the small things. The flowers blooming, the rustling leaves, the soft hum of nature, no matter how busy life got. As the years passed, Mrs. Jenkins became a beloved figure in the town, and her little garden was more than just a place to pass by. It became a symbol of care, patience, and the quiet joy that could be found in the simple act of tending to something day by day. The Garden of Lost Things. In the middle of a bustling city, there was a tiny garden hidden behind a high stone wall. It was the kind of place most people would walk past without noticing, tucked away behind a small gate covered in ivy. But if you ever stepped through that gate, you would find something truly special. The garden was called the Garden of Lost Things, and it was curated by an elderly woman named Marjorie. She had lived in the city her whole life and had developed a habit of collecting items that seemed to have been forgotten. Each day, Marjorie would walk the streets, scanning the sidewalks for anything people might have dropped. A worn-out glove, a book left behind on a park bench, a single earring. She would gather these items and bring them to the garden, where she would find a special place for each one. The garden was filled with little treasures. An old camera tucked into the branches of a tree, a broken pocket watch nestled in the soft moss, a torn-up letter pinned to a wooden fence. There were no signs, no labels, just the quiet knowledge that these were once things that mattered to someone, and now they were part of this peaceful, forgotten space. People who knew about the garden would sometimes visit, quietly walking among the rows of strange, beautiful objects, wondering about the stories behind them. And Marjorie would sit on a nearby bench, reading a book, content with the quiet and the knowledge that there was always something to be found in the forgotten corners of life. The man who fed the birds. Every morning, before the sun had fully risen, an elderly man named Mr. Green would walk to the park with a small bag of birdseed. He had been doing it for years, long after his wife had passed and his children had moved away. At first, no one noticed him, but gradually, people began to see him feeding the birds. He'd sit on the same park bench, scattering seeds on the ground and watching the birds gather. Sparrows, robins, pigeons, and even a few bright blue jays. He knew them all by sight and would greet them softly as they approached. The park regulars soon realized that Mr. Green was always there, no matter the weather, rain or shine, snow or sun. He would arrive early, just before anyone else, and spend his time feeding the birds. One day, a little girl asked him why he fed the birds every day. "They need me," he said simply, smiling at the way the birds hopped around him, just like we need each other. As the days went by, more people started to join him. Some brought their own birdseed, others just sat quietly beside him. Over time, the park became a place where people connected with nature and with one another through their shared appreciation for the simple act of feeding the birds. The knitter who made scarves for strangers, In a small town by the sea, there was a woman named Claire who spent most of her days knitting. She wasn't knitting for anyone in particular. She simply enjoyed the rhythm of the needles, the feel of the soft yarn in her hands. Every winter, Claire would knit a new scarf, one for every stranger who passed by her front door. She never asked for anything in return. She didn't want attention or praise. She simply wanted to share something warm with someone who might need it. Her scarves were always different. Some were soft and chunky, others were thin and delicate. Some were striped, others solid, but all were made with love and care. Claire would leave them hanging on the doorknob of her house or on a park bench, along with a little note that said, "Take this if you need it." Soon, people began to look for the scarves. They'd walk by Claire's house, hoping to find one on the door. Sometimes they did, and sometimes they didn't. But whether they received one or not, they always felt a little bit warmer, knowing that someone out there cared enough to leave something behind for them. Claire never saw the people who took her scarves, but as the years went by, she continued to knit, knowing that her simple act of kindness was making the world a little softer, one stitch at a time. The dog who waited for his owner. Every day at the same time, a golden retriever named Max would sit at the bus stop, waiting for his owner. He wasn't a stray. He had a home, a cozy house with a warm bed and a loving family. But every day, he would trot to the bus stop, sit on the sidewalk, and watch the road expectantly. Max's owner, a young woman named Sarah, worked at a nearby office. She always took the bus home at the same time each evening, and Max knew exactly when to wait for her. At first, people passing by thought it was strange, a dog just sitting there, looking at the street. But soon, they began to smile when they saw him. People would stop and pet him, talk to him for a few minutes, and then continue on their way. But Max would stay. He would sit, looking up at the road, waiting patiently for Sarah. And every evening, right on time, Sarah would arrive, step off the bus, and Max would leap up, his tail wagging furiously as he ran to greet her. It was their little routine, their small, silent understanding of each other. Max knew she was coming, and Sarah knew her dog would be waiting, no matter how long the day had been. The shop that sold memories. At the end of a winding alley in a quiet part of town, there was a tiny shop called the Memory Lane Shop. It didn't sell ordinary items. There were no trinkets or clothes. Instead, it sold memories. The shelves were lined with objects, each one wrapped carefully in brown paper and tied with string. There were old postcards from places long forgotten, pressed flowers from weddings and funerals, worn-out shoes that had seen the world, and tarnished lockets with faded photographs. The shopkeeper, an elderly man named Vincent, would smile gently whenever someone walked in. He didn't speak much. Instead, he would simply nod toward the shelves, inviting visitors to look through the items. Some people left with nothing. Others picked up a single object, paying a small amount for a memory they hadn't known they were missing. There were no explanations, no stories to accompany the items. But the people who visited the Memory Lane shop didn't need them. They understood that these objects held a quiet power, the ability to make you remember something you hadn't thought of in years, a glimpse of something long past. For Vincent, it was enough to know that the memories were shared. The shop wasn't for making money, it was for keeping stories alive. The woman who painted sunflowers for her neighbors in a small town surrounded by fields of gold there was a woman named Edith who had a simple hobby, painting sunflowers. She painted them in all sizes, all styles, and all colors. Every Sunday, Edith would go around the neighborhood, leaving her paintings on the doorsteps of her neighbors. They weren't expensive works of art, just simple, cheerful depictions of sunflowers with bright, bold petals. But each one was filled with a little bit of Edith's warmth. At first, the neighbors were puzzled. They didn't know who had left the paintings, but they appreciated them. The sunflowers brightened their porches, made them smile, and filled the air with a feeling of joy. One day, after receiving yet another sunflower painting, a neighbor named Mrs. Johnson decided to leave Edith a thank you note. She wrote, "Thank you for the sunshine you bring to our lives." From then on, Edith continued her little tradition, and her neighbors looked forward to each Sunday morning when a new sunflower would appear on their doorstep. Her paintings didn't make her famous or wealthy, but they made her neighborhood a little brighter, a little warmer, and a little kinder. The tree that watched over the playground, in the middle of a small park, there was an old oak tree that stood tall and proud. It wasn't the youngest tree in the park, but it was the largest. Its branches spread wide, providing shade to the children who played underneath it. For years, the children had grown up playing in its shadow. They ran around, climbed its trunk, and sat on its roots during lunch breaks. The tree had seen it all. The laughter, the tears, the running feet, the quiet moments. One afternoon, a little boy named Oliver sat under the tree, feeling a bit lonely. His friends were all playing soccer, and he didn't want to join them. Instead, he rested his head against the bark, closing his eyes for a moment. The tree seemed to whisper to him, offering quiet comfort. It wasn't a magical tree. It couldn't speak or move, but there was something about the way its branches swayed in the breeze, the way the sunlight filtered through its leaves, that made Oliver feel safe. And so, the tree continued to watch over the playground. It wasn't just a tree. It was a quiet protector, standing silently through the years, offering a place of refuge for anyone who needed it. The woman who made origami animals for children. In a little town, there was a woman named Lily who had a unique talent. She could make the most beautiful origami animals: birds, foxes, cats, elephants. Each one was meticulously folded from colorful paper. Every week, Lily would sit at the park with a pile of brightly colored paper and spend hours folding animals. Whenever a child passed by, she would give them one of her creations, along with a smile. At first, the children were unsure about taking the paper animals, but soon they began to look forward to seeing Lily at the park, eager to receive a new animal every week. Lily's origami animals became small treasures, each one a reminder of kindness, patience, and the joy of creativity. And as the years passed, Lily's little act of giving became a cherished part of the town, a symbol of how simple things can bring joy to others.